Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video and talk about this subject that I thought, of course, would be very particularly interesting. And I've talked about this subject now, quite a few times, but I think that this is going to be the last time, at least probably the full on video, where I kind of explain everything in further detail. And of course, the video that I'm going to be talking about, of course, is the Terence Bud Crawford conversation. We've been having this conversation now really for the past several years about who really truly deserves to be the number one pound for pound fighter. Of course, within the past several years, or even within the past 10 years, after Floyd Mayweather Jr., who of course you see on the right there. Of course, Floyd Mayweather Jr., after he retired, there was conversations about the winner of Andre Ward and Sergey Kovalev. Then there was kind of talks about Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. Then there was kind of talks about Terence Crawford and Lomachenko. Then there was talks about Canelo Alvarez. And there was talks about Crawford. And then now there's talks about Alexander Usyk. Now, the reason why I wanted to review this video by that of AKHi TV is because AKHi TV is going to show you a lot of the double standards. He's also going to show you overall, once again, a lot of the bullshit that he likes to propagate, out there. And I think that it's important to review a channel like this, at least every once in a while, because AKHi TV is a guy that is so full of shit. And AKHi TV, what this guy really is a representation of, is so many of the people that end up subscribing to him. And who are the type of people that end up subscribing to a channel like Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV? They're the guys that play the victimization, overall make excuses for everything that is wrong with my life type of people. That's why when Deontay Wilder, that's why when he ended up losing to that of Tyson Fury, overall, they made all these bullshit excuses saying that, oh, Wilder, he's a victim of cheating. The reason why they don't want to invest Tyson Fury is because they want to keep a brother down. They want to keep Deontay Wilder down. All this bullshit when in reality, they had no idea what the hell they're talking about. Now, I know that I'm going to get some people that come on my channel or watch this video and they're going to get very offended and then they're going to say, what are you talking about? Black fighters and black people, in America, they definitely have to deal with a lot of double standards and racism. What are you talking about? And that's absolutely true, of course. But there's a difference between an actual realistic case of racism or double standards. Say, for example, like if we want to talk about Deontay Wilder, if you're talking about the boxing fans stating that, they believe that most black fighters are boring or, that they're runners, blah, 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 and that they want to see knockouts. And then they praise, someone like a Golovkin or maybe someone that isn't all, that's stylistically, or I shouldn't even say stylistically, but all that technically sound, and they praise that fighter, but they won't praise someone like a Deontay Wilder. That is definitely a double standard. But the thing is about Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV is that instead of quoting, or commenting on a whole lot of actual good examples or actual relevant examples of racism or double standards, they pretty much are your regular basic, overall person from America, super liberal dude or, overall guy that loves to complain about double standards, pretty much about anything and everything. They're almost like, that one feminist or that one person that wants to scream Me Too or wants to scream that they were sexually assaulted or that, the man wasn't very, improper just because he said something on a date overall that they did not agree with. So basically, it's very hard to trust them because you never know what really could be the truth or not because they don't know the difference between an actual case that is relevant and a case that is not relevant. There's no shades of gray with these people. When you talk about AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation, if you disagree with their opinion, it's immediately racism. It's immediately because you have a secret agenda. It's immediately because of this. It's immediately because of that. And once again, you see a lot of the inner machinations and a lot of the bullshit that AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation are trying to propagate. Keep in mind that Terence Bud Crawford also apparently is going to fight Canelo Alvarez in September, of course, assuming that Canelo Alvarez gets past that of William Skull this upcoming May, which I believe now is only about a month away. Assuming that Canelo Alvarez gets past that of William Skull, keep in mind that AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation have been talking shit for years about Terence Bud Crawford allegedly being ducked by that of a Canelo Alvarez. And then as soon as the fight ended up being signed, what are they saying? Oh, well, the only reason why this fight is even close in the first place, is because of the size difference. What AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation are an example of is so many of the communities in that of America, especially or in westernized society, that love to bitch, moan, and complain about how marginalized they are, even when certain examples where it's not even relevant. Once again, that's why so many people are so sick, of people like Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV, because all they do is bitch, moan, and whine and complain about the double standards and the racism against boxers. And they tell people that, overall that they should appreciate and that they should stick up for quote unquote black boxers or black people. And then in the same vein, what they want to do is that they want to, they basically, overall want to single out other demographics, and try to piss them off, and have these double standards against other fighters. But then they get super pissed off overall when other people hold those same standards to other fighters. Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV are two of the biggest snakes and two of the biggest racists and hypocrites, not just in boxing media, but in sports media in general. And if you disagree with them, even if you're a so-called black man or even if you are a black fighter, they will humiliate you. Basically just like that of a regular liberal. Just like for those of you, for example, for those of you that vote, I don't personally vote because I think that politics, I think that it's a useless game, and I think that they're all snakes that, that they're trying to convey an image that they're not actually about. And I think that they're up to a whole bunch of other shit behind the scenes. But for those of you that did end up voting, for example, it's like a lot of the liberals that tell you overall to go out and vote and that, your vote matters, your vote counts, but they only want you to vote for who they want to vote for. Now, once again, I'm not a conservative. I'm not, anyone that really gets into politics, but it's almost like the super duper liberals, for example, for those of you that pay attention. The liberals, are very good friends with you, or, overall, they'll treat you very nicely, especially if you're a minority, as long as you agree or do everything that they say. And if you don't agree or do everything that they say, all of a sudden you're stupid. All of a sudden you're not educated. All of a sudden, it's common sense that, you should follow us. It's basically the same thing as Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV. What ended up happening with Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson, or the Charlo brothers or Terence Crawford, when they stated something that they did not agree with? They called them a coon. They called them a house Negro. That's what they called them. They called them an Uncle Tom. They would post pictures of Samuel L. Jackson from the movie Django Unchained. So once again, overall, these guys, even the people that follow them, they're not really your friend, especially AKHi TV. This dude right here that wishes very badly that he was black. You can tell by the way that he talks and the slang terms that he uses. This basically is like a regular wigger white boy that you knew from high school, but instead of course, being Caucasian, he's a quote-unquote Arab. But it is what it is. Anyways, we're going to see what AKHi TV has to say. I just thought that it was very particularly interesting. Let's get into it. Let's see what AKHi TV has to say. And of course, for those of you that don't know what this video is about, this video is about Floyd Mayweather Jr. recently calling Terence Bud Crawford the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, which I don't really have a problem with. Now, I don't agree with the man, at least at the current moment in time, but there's no problem with disagreeing as long as I can kind of see where you're coming from and you have some evidence to bring along to the table. But once again, let's see some of the bullshit that AKHi TV tries to pull.
Pound for pound, top fighter in boxing right now is Terence Crawford. To be honest, Terence Crawford, I just truly believe he doesn't have to be under my company for me to give a guy props. I'm not like that. Raw talent, hell of a fighter. He's a mother. And he reminds me of a young Floyd Mayweather. He can fight his ass off. And that's what I like about him.
I think Terence Crawford right now in the sport of boxing is the pound-for-pound best fighter in the sport of boxing right now. It's good to see him in the position that he's in.
This is the MJ of boxing, Floyd Mayweather, nearly a decade ago. And now, still stating the same thing, which is Terence Bud Crawford is the undisputed pound-for-pound king. What's interesting is when Floyd Mayweather fought, there was no question back then to who was the pound-for-pound #1 king. They tried to squeeze Pacquiao in there, but that was a short run. And even then, Floyd...
Well, let me talk about this very quickly. Because as disingenuous as what AKHi TV actually is, this is the bullshit that he's going to try to pull. See, AKHi TV leaves out either so much information, either A, willingly, or B, because he doesn't know really what the fuck he's talking about. I think it's a little bit of a mix of both. Aki, see, what he basically stated there was that they tried to sneak Manny Pacquiao over Floyd Mayweather Jr. as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, and he didn't deserve it. What ended up happening was, for those of you that, and I did not even watch the majority of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s career because I'm only 27 years old. By the time that I started watching Mayweather and Pacquiao, they were near the end of their primes. So, I mean, the thing is that, but even I know, because I know my boxing history, that a part of the reason why Manny Pacquiao was eventually labeled as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter is because Mayweather ended up retiring not just on one occasion, but a couple of occasions. So at the end of the day, what you want them to keep Floyd Mayweather up there when apparently he's retired, no longer boxing, no longer a champion anymore in any particular weight class, no longer sanctioned for any bouts, and you want him to remain as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter? It don't work that way. At the end of the day, and even if Manny Pacquiao is eventually put at the #1 spot, which of course I think that he was rightfully, to that claim, at least as long as Mayweather was gone. If you come back, you can't just get the #1 pound-for-pound spot immediately. You have to still show that you're relevant to the sport. It is what it is.
Floyd was still the pound-for-pound #1 king. There was no debate about it. Just like when Roy Jones fought, there was no debate to who was the pound-for-pound #1 king. Till Roy aged and got dethroned.
Well, this is the thing that I also wanted to talk about. Because AKHi TV and these guys like Dante's Boxing Nation, what they keep trying to do is that they keep trying to correlate Terence Bud Crawford's career with that of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s and Roy Jones Jr.'s. He does not have a similar career. Now, he has a great career in his own right, but comparing, someone actually made a very, very great comparison the other day, I think, or not the other day, but about a few weeks to a month ago, I believe, on my channel. Someone actually told me this. And I think that this is the best comparison that I can think of. I'm not exactly sure who commented in it, but I'll give them a shout out right now. But someone stated that Terence Bud Crawford, he's almost like the Khabib Nurmagomedov of boxing. And for those of you that don't know UFC, Khabib Nurmagomedov was probably the most dominant fighter that I had ever seen for a UFC fighter. To be quite honest with you, he might be the most dominant fighter that I've ever seen, whether it be in boxing or mixed martial arts, period, because he almost like never lost a round. Khabib Nurmagomedov was that dominant of a fighter. And he's definitely an all-time great level fighter in my view. He's someone that, is one of the greats. But when you compare him to certain guys like Georges St. Pierre or John Jones or Anderson Silva, I don't think that he can quite be on that level because, yeah, he's undefeated and he was more dominant than anybody else, but he just doesn't have the body of work as those fighters. So even though he's a great all-around fighter and a fighter that was probably the most dominant that I had ever seen, it's very similar with Crawford. Now, I don't think Crawford was quite as dominant for his sport as what a Khabib was, at least when you talk about, combat v combat wise. But I mean, the thing is that Crawford was definitely dominant during his sport and he was supremely skilled, no doubt about it. But the thing is that, that's a very great comparison because people always try to compare Crawford's resume or they try to compare his career side by side with Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Sugar Ray Leonard or guys like Roy Jones. I mean, I think that you put Terence Bud Crawford in any era or in the ring against any of those fighters, if they were the same size, I think Crawford can give them hell, even beat some of those guys, potentially even all of them. Who the hell knows? But at the end of the day, the thing is that, we'll never know that. And on top of that, he just doesn't have the resume of any of those guys. So I mean, AKHi TV and what these guys will try to do is that they'll try to manipulate the facts around and tell you that, see, they tried to do it 10 years ago or 15 years ago with Mayweather and Pacquiao. They're trying to do it again with our brother Terence Bud Crawford. That's not what ended up happening. And for all intents and purposes, a big part of the reason why Crawford was never labeled the #1 pound-for-pound fighter for such a long-ass time because he was fighting a whole bunch of bums. And, and I told people this. If you ask Terence Bud Crawford fans, like, what his biggest wins are, they'll tell you with a straight face, overall, oh, well, you seen him knock out Jose Benavidez and Aegis Velasquez and Felix Diaz. Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck that he beat any of those guys? They're bums. They were never champions at the end of the day. They weren't even regular champions. Like, give me a fucking break.
Roy aged and got dethroned. Then Floyd Mayweather picked up the torch. Floyd was so great. He kept one of the greatest fighters of all time under his shadow. Andre Ward didn't have a chance to become pound for pound #1 until Floyd retired.
Now let's rewind that. Let's see what AKHi TV recently said about Andre SOG Ward. And I'm doing this for a specific reason. And for a lot of you that have been around my channel long enough, you probably know why. But anyways.
Was so great. He kept one of the greatest fighters of all time under his shadow. Andre Ward didn't have a chance to become pound for pound #1 until Floyd retired.
Now, isn't that so interesting? This person, AKHi TV, that always claims that he's about the whole truth and keeping it real. Whenever people really claim that they're quote unquote keeping it real, what that really means, what that's really a connotation for is that I'm going to keep it real, but the real way that I feel, and not really the way that, I want to, not keeping the same standards. Because someone could really think something is true or real based off of emotion. If you've ever gotten, really angry in the moment, say an argument, with your mother or your father, or, an argument overall with a significant other or brother or sister, you may in that moment actually feel, overall what you're actually saying. In that moment, you may even feel hatred towards them. But of course, it doesn't ever last for long. The point being is this: when you're talking off of emotion, which oftentimes AKHi TV does, you can never trust that person to have a logical or an objective standpoint. And when you're always trying to compete overall with a lot of the racial fans and all that bullshit, which AKHi TV and these guys clearly try to do, you can never be trusted as an objective analyzer. But part of the reason, once again, why these guys have such a big following is because they appeal to the most dim-witted overall and stupid-ass demographic overall, once again, which is very similar, overall to that super-duper liberal, demographic in the westernized societies, which is that we're going to blame everyone else for our problems and we're completely powerless. We're always a victim, but at the same time, we can insult you at any given moment in time, but if you insult us, we're going to bitch, whine, and complain about it. Which is the most obnoxious demographic overall out of any other demographic.
That's when Andre Ward became pound for pound #1. And then as soon as Ward...
But once again, to talk about Andre Ward, he just called Andre SOG Ward one of the greatest fighters of all time. Isn't that very particularly interesting how Andre SOG Ward is one of the greatest fighters of all time? Now, what did we hear recently about Alexander Usyk when he just defeated Tyson Fury, AJ Anthony Joshua, and Danny Dubois? What AKHi TV stated is that, well, I understand what Timothy Bradley was stating about Usyk not being an all-time great, because how can we really call him an all-time level great when, guys like Evander Holyfield would destroy Usyk? And all that is a bunch of, that is so dumb. Whenever it comes to basketball arguments, that's like the dumbass Kobe Bryant fan base that says overall, oh well, Kobe Bryant, overall, he was a guy that was better in this situation, better than that. If you just take a look at the eye test, if you ever talk to a Kobe Bryant fan, they always talk about that stupid shit. Them and Allen Iverson fans, that's like the same shit. How do we fucking know that? How do we know for sure overall that Usyk would have lost to someone like Evander Holyfield? We don't know that shit. We don't take a look at Evander Holyfield or someone like that and say, well, how can we count Evander Holyfield as one of the all-time greats when he would have got his ass kicked over someone like Muhammad Ali or George Foreman, in his prime? We don't fucking know that. But people always use that standard, overall in order to really tear someone down, and just the way that certain people do that with certain black fighters, overall like Mayweather or Crawford or certain guys like that. AKHi TV and Dante do that with non-black fighters. But once again, for those of you that remember, not too long ago, AKHi TV said, Usyk can't even be in the top 10 all-time great heavyweights, all their stuff. And I mean, listen, if you want to state that because he hasn't had that certain amount of title defenses, that's up to you. But at the end of the day, Alexander Usyk definitely is an all-time great level fighter. It's really not even a conversation if you know what the hell you're talking about. If you're a boxing analyzer anywhere near worth your salt. But isn't it very interesting? Because what was AKHi TV's point about why Usyk can't be an all-time level great, at least debatably? Oh, well, the great black American heavyweight is not around today because they're more in football and more in other sports, blah, blah, blah. Right, but you weren't talking that shit with Andre SOG Ward. Because how many great black American fighters were around the 168 and 175 pound weight classes? The 2 and 3 biggest wins in Andre Ward's career were over Mikhail Kessler, Carl Frosch, and Sergey the Crusher Kovalev. But Andre SOG Ward is one of the greatest fighters of all time. Come on. Are you serious? Like these guys love to praise Joe Louis, who fought pretty much nothing but Caucasians, throughout his era, which is fine. If you want to give him credit, that's fine. But they never mentioned Rocky Marciano, who actually defeated the best black fighters of his day, even though they were a bit older. Keep in mind this: Joe Louis was a guy that actually lost to Ezzard Charles while he was moving up in weight, and I believe never avenged that loss. Rocky Marciano never lost a fight. He ended up beating Archie Moore when Archie Moore definitely was older, but Archie Moore overall, once again, was still, I believe, the light heavyweight or the cruiserweight champion of that time. Rocky Marciano knocked him out. He beat, I believe, Jersey Joe Walcott and also Ezzard Charles. He beat all those guys. He knocked them all out. All right, keep that in mind. Joe Louis got beat by Max Schmeling at one point in time in his career. He also got embarrassed by Ezzard Charles. All right, and Joe Louis was a legitimate heavyweight for back then. Like, he was a guy, that probably would be a light heavyweight today, overall, but he was a guy that, was, rightfully sized for the heavyweight division back then. Rocky Marciano was not. Like, a lot of people don't understand that. Rocky Marciano was a dude that was like, what, 5'7", 5'8", maybe a bit taller than that. I'm not sure, with the 67-inch arm reach. Like, Rocky Marciano, even back then, really was not even a true natural heavyweight. So a lot of people don't actually understand what Rocky had to do in order to actually accomplish what he did, but it is what it is. Anyways, that being said, it is just very interesting. And of course, certain people are going to disagree with me about the Rocky point. Listen, I get it. A lot of the fighters that he did fight were a bit older. Now, I still think that those fighters were at a decent point, but I mean, it's up to you. But the Usyk point to me is just ridiculous.
Retired, Crawford picked up the torch. Therefore, the timeline of the pound-for-pound kings from the 1990s, and even before that,
And basically, before we continue, my main point being is this. It's just so interesting how AKHi TV and some of these pro-blackity black channels, or guys like Dante and AKHi TV, they'll use this point about, oh, well, these European fighters are trash. But, if they fight one of our, favorite fighters that we want to promote, then all of a sudden they're super good. Like, get the fuck out of here.
Today was Roy Jones, who passed the torch to Floyd, who passed the torch to Andre Ward, who passed the torch to Terence Bud Crawford. And Terence Bud Crawford, just like Floyd, was the pound-for-pound #1, without any debate, all this time. However, old media...
Let me rewind that, because I couldn't tell if he said Terence Crawford or somebody else.
Bud Crawford. And Terence Bud Crawford, just like Floyd, was the pound-for-pound #1, without any debate, all this time.
No, he wasn't, but AKHi TV once again is going to try to make that, because once again, he's fooling a lot of these idiots and fooling a lot of people. This is once again why I like to comment on some of his videos, because if you're newer to boxing and you believe a lot of this shit, I can't necessarily blame that person, because a lot of people overall, they just kind of go with what a person is saying in a video and they just kind of run with it. But many people that talk in boxing, you have to be very, very careful, because they're very politically motivated, man. Like, AKHi TV is super racially and politically motivated. And most boxing channels are, to be quite honest with you. I would say that you probably cannot trust 99% of boxing channels out there. The few ones that I would say that you can trust, like, legitimately, through and through, would probably be guys like Headman Strikes Back. Not saying I agree with everything that he says, but I think that his, mind and heart are at least somewhat in the right place. Boxing Waves is another one that I would recommend. And there might be a couple of other ones that, personally I'm not thinking of, at least when they talk about all around boxing. Now, is there certain good points that certain channels can make, like Boxing Eagle and that of Blue Blood Sports TV? Sure, but anyone that aligns themselves with the LDBC and new media, you already know that they're going to be super racially motivated more than what they actually are factually and logically motivated. Just period. It is what it is.
However, old media tried to break up the passing of the torch by...
Now, of course, that being stated, I've also heard something about, apparently pro-Caucasian channels or, other shit like that, when we talk about like the YTBC or whatever the hell that is. Personally, I've never really seen their content, at least nowhere near as much as the LDBC or new media. But I mean, it's possible. I've also seen certain channels like that, of course, of, what the hell is his name? I've reviewed his content before, but he used to go by the name of Precise Presenter. I've reviewed his channel before. Yes, he can be a very racially motivated commentator as well. So boxing channels, no matter the demographic, you have to be very careful, because boxing is a very, 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 very racially motivated sport.
the fighters on the coincidental list with politics, since they were not trying to live through another 2 decades of another fighter just like Floyd from the coincidental list whipping on their favorite fighters. Therefore, old media created the New Hope Order by pushing the agenda and creating the narrative that the best fighter in the world is a fighter from the Hope list. The way they decided to go about it is even if the fighter from the Hope list loses, they're going to replace him with another fighter from the Hope list and give him the crown for the pound for pound king, for the best fighter in the world. Basically, they changed the criteria to being the best fighter in the world to being the most liked fighter in the world.
Once again, let me pause this here. Because what AKHi TV is stating right here, if you don't know the background of the story or any of the history, of course, this sounds, overall, once again, very logical. Because they would be like, well, you have Terence Bud Crawford at number 2. Why would you not appraise him at number 1? Here's the problem. Terence Bud Crawford, throughout the past several years before his fight with Errol Spence Jr., there was a multitude of people, and not even just Caucasian or Latino fighters or boxing fans, but many people, even a lot of black fans or even a certain amount of other people, even the LDBC and certain new media channels, overall we're stating, we're stating that, he does not have that great of a resume. It just is what it is.
Being the fighter that they like instead of who is truly the best. The people who established the New Hope Order are the wizards of old media, the leaders of the race fans. Their agenda is simple. If you are a fighter on the coincidental list, then you are disqualified to be the pound for pound king in the sport of boxing, even if you overqualify.
But here's the thing, AKHi TV. Ring Magazine and ESPN as at one point in time ranked Terence Bud Crawford as the number 1 pound for pound fighter. Now they're going to go through a list of names such as Lomachenko, Roman Gonzalez, and Kovalev, and Gennady Golovkin, and I'm going to be talking about all those. Because once again, AKHi TV, what he does best is rewrite history, or really what he does best is talk about a whole bunch of emotional narratives that oftentimes more than not did not happen anywhere near to the degree that he tries to claim that they were. But we're going to talk about that as the video goes along. Let's get into it.
Your complexion for the neglection disqualifies you automatically. And that's what happened to Bud and Andre Ward. But if you are a fighter on the Hope list, then you qualify to be the...
Now, this right here, of course, is showing overall the little graphic here where Teddy Atlas, of course, stated that Lomachenko was number 1 pound per pound, which, of course, was ridiculous at the time to have him over someone like a Ward and that of a Terence Bud Crawford at the time. But that being stated, Teddy Atlas is not someone that controls the pound per pound list. So when AKHi TV is stating that Lomachenko was ranked number 1 pound per pound a little bit early ahead, yes, he was by Teddy Atlas. But the thing is that it's not like he was ranked number 1 pound per pound at that time by Ring Magazine and ESPN. Lomachenko was not really ranked number 1 pound per pound until he won in his 3rd weight class and was able to beat that guy of Jorge Linares, I believe, at least 100% officially. Now, he may have been, the number 1 pound per pound fighter a little bit earlier than that, after he defeated a Guillermo Rigondeaux. But, Lomachenko, listen, at the end of the day, people can like it, they can not like that. Let me just ask you this. When you talk about these series of wins, who do you think are the better elite wins? When you just talk about these 4 wins before the Errol Spence Jr. win, do you think overall that Gary Russell Jr., Nicholas Walters, Guillermo Rigondeaux, and Jorge Linares are the better series of wins? Or do you think Victor Postol, Yuriorkis Gamboa, Joyous Ndango, and Jeff Horn are the better series of wins? We all know basically the answer to that question, because when Vasily Lomachenko was looked at as the number 1 pound per pound, Crawford had not fought, over the likes of a Sean Porter or Errol Spence Jr. yet. So people can like that, they can not like that. Listen, anyone who has an actual lick of boxing history knows that the wins that Lomachenko was getting at the time were bigger and better than what Crawford was getting. Period. End of story.
Pound for pound number 1, even if you are not.
And before I get some Terence Bud Crawford fanboy overall trying to counter me on that, let me just explain those series of 4 wins. Gary Russell Jr. would eventually become one of the longer reigning champions, I believe, at either the 126 or 130 pound weight class. That's what ended up happening with Gary Russell Jr. Guillermo Rigondeaux, although he was clearly smaller, Guillermo Rigondeaux was a guy that was a top 5 to top 10 pound for pound fighter and undefeated when Lomachenko beat him. And I know that I'm going to get certain guys that claim, oh, Rigondeaux was off for a year. Yes, so was Yuriorkis Gamboa. Also, keep in mind that Errol Spence Jr. was off for 14 months when Terence Bud Crawford fought him. So if you're going to go with those narratives and those, standards, please keep the same standards, because it's not like Crawford fought Errol Spence Jr. when he was supremely active. He fought Errol Spence coming off of an over-year layoff. Same with Gamboa. He fought Yuriorkis Gamboa coming off of a year layoff, because I believe that he had somewhat of a domestic abuse or domestic assault issue with his wife or former wife or something like that. So that's what ended up happening there. Okay, so for anyone that's going to try to pull that bullshit, overall, once again, it's not like Crawford has not fought certain guys at those things either. All right, so spare me the bullshit. All right, so then, we have that, and of course, Guillermo Rigondeaux was top 10 pound for pound. Linares was a somewhat unified champion of that weight class, who was a two-weight division champion, I believe, at that point in time in his career. And then, of course, you also have that of Nicholas Walters, who was looked at as the best guy of that weight class other than Lomachenko. It was supposed to be a super fight, and Lomachenko pretty much whooped his ass from pillar to post. Okay? Anyways.
Even if you don't...
Now, comparing it to the 4 series of wins that Crawford got, let's compare. Because when you talk about Gamboa, Gamboa was a very good fighter, but I would not claim that he was on the level of a Rigondeaux. No one had ever claimed that Gamboa was a top 10 or top 20 pound for pound fighter, or at least not top 10. You take a look at a lot of lists back then, he was not ranked top 10 pound for pound when Crawford fought him. Period. All right? It is what it is. And Crawford was bigger than Gamboa, because Gamboa really did not belong in that weight class. Then we go to the next win. We talked about Victor Postol. Postol was a very decent fighter. He got the one win over Lucas Matisse. He never won a big fight ever again in his career. Lost to Josh Taylor, lost to Jose Ramirez, lost to Regis Prograis, or excuse me, not to Regis Prograis, but he lost to Josh Taylor, lost to Jose Ramirez, and I believe after that he lost to Gary Antoine Russell. And it's not like Victor Postol ended up getting knocked out against Crawford. He just got outpointed. So once again, this bullshit of, overall, oh, well, Victor Postol wasn't completely the same after that fight. No, he was the same fighter. It's just that Victor Postol, he had one good win over Lucas Matisse. He was very big for the 140-pound weight class. And once he fought someone that, overall could actually handle, some of the things that he was bringing to the table and his size, he wasn't really as good as what he once was, period. People try to act like Victor Postol, like what AKHi TV will try to tell you is like Victor Postol, that he comes from the Ukrainian boxing school as what, Usyk and Lomachenko do. Well, listen, some Ukrainians are very tough fighters, but not all of them are Lomachenko, and not all of them are like that, overall of a Usyk. Like, that's like saying Tyson Fury, he beat Deontay Wilder, so he has the ability to beat someone like a Floyd Mayweather. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. Just because someone beats a Ukrainian fighter doesn't mean that they're of the exact same skill set or as talented as this other fighter. But that's what AKHi TV and a certain amount of these other guys try to do. But anyways, and then of course you talk about Jeff Horn, who got the win over Manny Pacquiao, a fight that a lot of people really don't even believe that he won. Now, in my view, it was a fight that could have went either way, but Jeff Horn was one of those guys that ended up getting a great, fantastic win only once in his career, never did shit ever again. There's a fighter like this in every generation. He was the Buster Douglas / Ricardo Mayorga of his generation, or Leon Spinks of his generation. He had one fantastic win and a very good fought effort against an older Manny Pacquiao overall that probably did not take him all that seriously. Then after that, he never accomplished shit again in his career. There's a fighter like that in every generation. Joyous Ndongo really did not defeat anyone that great. He defeated a Ricky Burns that was aging and really did not even belong at that weight class. And he also defeated a Edward Troyanowski, who was a very limited fighter. So once again, any Crawford fanboy that's going to come at me and say all this stuff about, well, those wins are better than the Lomachenko wins, absolutely not.
Qualify. As long you have the complexion for the connection to get the hope's protection. And that's exactly what they did for the past decade since Floyd retired. Remember, when Floyd retired, there was no question to who was the pound for pound number one.
Right, but the reason why there was no question as to why he was the number one pound for pound is because Floyd was actually fighting fighters. No offense, but once again, people keep trying to align Crawford's resume right there with Mayweather's resume. He does not have a similar career. Crawford has done things great in his career. He's a fantastic fighter. He has a fantastic career. But when you talk about Mayweather, Mayweather is this guy that has debatably the greatest resume of all time. Like when you talk about pound for pound fighters that he fought guys that were either formerly on the top 10 pound for pound list or guys that were on the top 10 pound for pound list when he fought them. Like when he fought Marquez, Pacquiao, Mosley, Canelo, and also, some other fighters, I believe, maybe even Zab Judah, I can't remember, and some other fighters, like all those guys were on the top 10 pound for pound list. That's what a certain amount of people don't understand. Or they were coming off of the biggest career win of their career, and they were looked at as somewhat of A grade or at least very solid B grade level talents. The fighters that Crawford was mainly fighting, no offense, but like I said, other than, Spence and Porter and Madrimov and Postol and Gamboa, he really didn't fight anybody else. AKHi TV and these guys, they'll keep trying to stretch out the wins of Kavaliauskas and Jose Benavidez. Those guys never fucking beat anybody, and then Jose Benavidez ended up pretty much getting embarrassed against Danny Garcia after Terence Bud Crawford, overall. And then, when you talk about, I believe he just Kavaliauskas, he got beat the same way against Virgil Ortiz. So, I mean, these guys keep trying to stretch out these wins of Aegis Kavaliauskas and Jose Benavidez. Those guys are nobodies. They're bums.
No question to who was the pound for pound number one. Andre Ward was number one and Crawford was number two. But guess what? Old media gave the crown to Roman Gonzalez.
Now, what I will state is this. Roman Gonzalez is the one example that, in my personal view, that you can state was kind of wrongfully placed there. And Ring Magazine and quote-unquote old media, as they like to call them, such as ESPN and other guys like these, they definitely have somewhat of a pandering list at times. Like, there are certain fighters that were either a little bit too early in the conversation when they shouldn't have been or shouldn't even be on the list. Like, of course, there's a great debate about if Junto Nakatani should be on the list. And listen, I get it, because at the end of the day, the man, although he's a three-weight division champion, pretty decently skilled and dominant, but he hasn't really beat anybody. So that's understandable. Certain things like that, or ranking Roman Gonzalez number one when we don't know really anyone that he's beat. All that is completely understandable. But to state something like, overall, like, Lomachenko or Canelo or Usyk, that, they tried to put those guys there and they didn't even deserve to be there. No, you can't claim that. At least not if you're, claiming to be a good boxing analyzer. If you want to claim that in your view Crawford was over them, that's fine. I would disagree with you, at least at those times. But I mean, the thing is that just to state that there was no debate about it, what you're really showing is that you're super emotional about the situation and that you were a little bit pissed off that Terence Bud Crawford was not ranked number one pound for pound, and that you were always super racially motivated about it all along, because to state something along the lines to say that there's no debate about it whatsoever, that's just asinine.
Right back then, we didn't even know who he was. And his reign was short ran because he ended up getting KO'd. As soon as,
like, if I were to talk about the UFC right now, or if I were to talk about, say, the UFC overall, let's just say if we were comparing two all-time grade level fighters, if I were to say compare like someone like, a John Jones or a Georges St. Pierre, and if I were to state overall that, this guy is greater and it's really not even close, wouldn't you take a look at me and be like, what's with this guy? Like, why would you say that? Because both of them have a great amount of title defenses. They're both two-weight division champions. Why would you state overall that it's not even necessarily close and that they're just, levels apart and that there's no debate about it? Like, doesn't that kind of seem a little bit odd? There's very few sports to where when you take a look at the quote-unquote GOAT conversation or number one pound for pound conversation, that it's just completely not even debatable. I mean, the few sports that I would really say that in is like, maybe Tom Brady for NFL or Michael Jordan for basketball. And even then, that has some debates. If you want to talk about, tennis, I would say Novak Djokovic. But of course, certain people would have some other debates. Right now, I don't think it's that debatable. But I mean, it is what it is. It's up to you. And of course, football, talking about NFL, there's more positions than just a quarterback as well. So, of course, we would have to talk about players like Jerry Rice and Lawrence Taylor and other guys like that. But I mean, whatever. Point being is that you get what I mean.
he did, they replaced him with Kovalev. Then, as soon as...
Right, but when was Sergey Kovalev actually ever ranked number one pound for pound? I don't remember Sergey Kovalev ever being ranked #1 pound for pound on any particular list, not even ESPN or Ring Magazine. If I'm wrong about that, then someone can correct me. They can share me an old list. Now, what I do remember was that Sergey the Crusher Kovalev was ranked, I believe, within the top 3 or top 5 pound for pound because of what he was doing in the light heavyweight division. So for people to state this stuff about how Sergey Kovalev and Gennady Golovkin, how they were being ranked as #1 pound for pound, that's not true. Now, certain guys may have been trying to say that he was deserving of that, but ESPN and Ring Magazine, they were not legitimately putting them at the #1 spot. They weren't.
Kovalev got knocked out by Andre Ward, they replaced him with Gennady Golovkin. As soon as Gennady Golovkin lost and got
But Gennady Golovkin was now ranked over Andre Ward on the pound for pound list by either ESPN or Ring Magazine. I remember it. At least I don't remember that. If he was ranked above Andre Ward, it was before the Sergey the Crusher Kovalev fight. And of course, one can claim that that's a little bit, bias in itself. And of course, that's understandable. But to state something along the lines of, oh, well, they tried to put Gennady Golovkin at #1 pound for pound, right? But they never did. So, I mean, like, this stuff about AKHi TV and all this other stuff, I'm not claiming that Ring Magazine and that ESPN, that they're just completely unbiased. But what I am going to state is that AKHi TV and Dante, these guys are really the most biased rankers pretty much out of any boxing media, because they basically are trying to make you believe that it's not even a debate at all. That Terence Bud Crawford is just clearly the best of his generation, and that guys like Canelo or Usyk or maybe later on Inoue, that, overall that, they're not even comparable. And really the only the only argument being is that, Crawford, that he was so dominant, and then he had that one tremendous win over Errol Spence that was supremely dominant, right? But it's not like Terence Bud Crawford has looked like that in every single fight. He did have a certain amount of problems against Madrimov. He did have a certain amount of problems against Porter and Gamboa. Now, of course, he was able to stop some of those guys, but I mean, still, people try to act like Crawford has like never lost a round or something.
exposed, they replaced him with Lomachenko. They even erased Lomachenko's loss on more than one occasion in order to justify why he was pound for pound #1 over Bud Crawford back.
And I do remember that, and that definitely was ridiculous. But that being stated, Lomachenko did deserve claim to at least debatably being the #1 pound for pound. People can like it, they can not like it. But AKHi TV and these guys, they love to bitch, moan, and complain about resume. Say whatever you want to. Crawford has not had a great resume throughout his career. Just is what it is.
Ben. Ironically, though, as soon as Lomachenko ended up losing, instead of placing the guy who they had ranked as #1B, Terence Bud Crawford, behind #1A Lomachenko, they ended up putting Canelo Alvarez as the #1 pound for pound over Crawford.
Because they basically had to. At the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez became a two-weight division champion. He defeated Gennady Golovkin, then he defeated Danny Jacobs. Then he went all the way up, I believe, to light heavyweight to beat Sergey Kovalev. Overall, of course, a Kovalev that wasn't, a top 10 pound per pound fighter anymore, but someone that was coming off of wins over two undefeated light heavyweight great, contenders in Anthony Yard and, of course, Eleider Alvarez, and Canelo was able to beat him. It was time to put him as the #1 pound per pound. It just is what it is. And he just had a way better resume than Crawford. People can like that, they can not like that. But listen, at that time in his career, he had the wins, I believe, over, Austin Trout. When you talk about all these wins, they were debatable A-grade level wins. He had the win over Austin Trout, which was a huge fight at the time. He had the win, I believe, over Lara, which, of course, was a fight that could have went either way. But, of course, they gave it to Canelo. It's a fight that could have went either way. It is what it is. And then, of course, after that, Miguel Cotto, then Gennady Golovkin, who was looked at as top 5 pound per pound, then Danny Jacobs. Let me also address this, because I keep having this guy Dantra, in my comment section. I can't even tell if this dude's trolling or if this dude's just overall pea-brain. But this dude, he was trying to legit, argue in my comment section that Danny Jacobs said he was a former cancer survivor and he went through chemotherapy. That's why Canelo Alvarez didn't fight a great version of him. Dude, what the fuck are you talking about? Danny Jacobs was a guy that he was diagnosed in cancer, I believe, way, way, way prior to the Canelo Alvarez fight. He was diagnosed with cancer, I believe, all the way back in 2011. The first time that he had ever won the title was after the cancer had left his body. So you're telling me that Danny Jacobs, that when he beat Peter Quillen and beat Sergio Mora and had that great fight with Gennady Golovkin, that he was not during his prime? even though that was the only point in time during that time that he had ever won a belt before. Does that make any fucking sense whatsoever? That the man before he won the belt was not in his prime, but then once he won the belt, you know, he wasn't in his prime. Does that make any fucking sense whatsoever? Anyway.
Was below Crawford.
And keep in mind that Danny Jacobs, yes, he had that tough fight with Golovkin, but he had not really shown any major signs of slippage. He beat the undefeated Sergey Derevyanchenko to become a two-time middleweight champion. Then Canelo, of course, was able to capture the middleweight title. Okay? Now, of course, what AKHi TV and these guys will claim is that Canelo was avoiding guys like Andrade and that, I believe, of, what was his name? Jamal Charlo. Now, the Andrade fight, I believe, overall, Canelo did somewhat avoid. But the Jamal Charlo fight, he really didn't avoid. He tried to get Jamal Charlo at the middleweight division, but these guys, what they won't claim is that Jamal Charlo has even admitted himself he's turned that fight down. You know, that they sent him an offer and he declined it. Both of the Charlo brothers have admitted to it. Anyway.
On their list. Remember, that's what they have been doing this entire time since Roman Gonzalez. Anyways, Canelo Alvarez ended up losing. Canelo lost every round to Bivol.
No, he didn't lose every round to Bivol. You know, but he was never really supposed to beat Bivol in the first place. Even though, of course, the odds claim that Canelo was the favorite, because Canelo's a dude that's 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach, dude. He's not supposed to beat a light heavyweight like Bivol. Canelo is really a middleweight, and that's why I keep saying people don't really like people like this idiot AKHi TV. They don't realize, or I think they do realize to a degree, because they have to tear down Canelo Alvarez to such a great degree. Like, these guys, listen, they tear down a lot of fighters, but Canelo Alvarez is the #1 guy that they love to tear down. They love talking about that dude. Like, they you could be having a random conversation with the AKHi TV about burgers. You know, overall, like, God damn it, like, you know, this burger, you know, it's a little bit too pink in the middle. You know who else I hate? That pink and red-haired bastard Canelo Alvarez. Fuck him. like anytime that there's a chance overall to talk about Canelo Alvarez, this motherfucker always mentions Canelo Alvarez. Both him and Dante's Boxing Nation. But that's how you know who the true king actually is. Because the king is always talked about.
And instead of placing Crawford as #1 finally, they ended up finding Inoue out of nowhere and placing.
Well, Inoue, of course, was found out of nowhere, and he definitely was pushed to the top 5 pound for pound very, very early. Too early in my personal view. But once again, what's so interesting is that AKHi TV, he's one of these guys that loves to claim that Crawford was #1 pound for pound because of his dominance. You know, that was their main argument, because they knew that they know deep down that he's not fought shit, at least throughout the majority of his career. Just is what it is. At least not A-grade level fighters. Now, once again, he has about 5 A-grade solid level wins. But when you talk about Kyle Velasquez and Felix Diaz and Jose Bent, no one gives a fuck about those guys. Those guys aren't A-grade level fighters. Give me a damn break. So what they would always say is that, well, Crawford is looking dominant over Olympians and all sort of stuff. Like, please, give me a goddamn break. It just is what it is. All right, you know, please spare me the bullshit of Crawford being dominant over these B and C grade level fighters. All right, I mean, you know, in a way, at least what I'll claim about him is that his B and C grade level fighters, a lot of them were either champions or former champions. So, I mean, if you want to talk about some of the guys that Inoue was fighting, so a lot of those guys are probably higher quality than what Crawford was beating. Because at least some of the fighters that Inoue's fighting were champions.
And there instead. They also did the same thing to Usyk. What's crazy is I told you guys this was going to happen. I'm not a prophet, but I told you guys.
But that even being stated, Inoue was not ranked #1 pound for pound by ESPN or Ring Magazine, at least not legitimately by some of those lists, until he defeated Stephen Fulton. And once Crawford ended up defeating Errol Spence Jr., they still ranked Crawford as the #1 pound for pound fighter over him. Now, right now, they have Inoue over Crawford, which I would kind of disagree with, because I think the resume is still in Crawford's favor, but I can't necessarily disagree to the utmost degree, because Crawford is just very inactive. Like, Inoue is a guy that fights 3 to 4 times a year, and he is fighting champions, whether you think they're B or C grade level champions or not. He is fighting some level of champions, you know, and if he ends up beating both Nick Ball and also that of MJ Akhmadali of this year, those are 2 A-grade level wins that you can count on his resume potentially. So, I mean, Inoue is a guy to where he's not fucking around, you know, so this dude is very active. Crawford has only fought once a year, I believe, for the past 2 years. So it is going to be a little bit more troublesome.
They were going to try to replace Crawford with Inoue and Usyk after Canelo loses. And that's exactly what ended up happening. How did I know that? It's because I already knew about the New Hope Order by old media.
Castle Black is the only thing standing between the White Walkers and the Seven Kingdoms.
Order by old media. After that, though, the crazy part about it all is the fact that they had Errol Spence as top 3 pound for pound on all of their lists. And when Crawford fought him, Crawford was arguably number 1. Even according to them, he was number 2, number 3. So 2 top 3 pound for pound fighters fought each other in a fight that's supposed to be Hagler-Hearn. Crawford beat Errol Spence in the ass whipping of the century, respectfully. Even then, they
The ass whooping of the century, respectfully. And listen, man, I love Errol Spence Jr., you know, man down. But listen, at the end of the day, dude, that was probably the worst performance that I can remember, at least out of a quote-unquote super fight, other than Deontay Wilder. But, I mean, even Deontay Wilder got his licks against Tyson Fury. You know, Errol Spence, man, he did jack shit against Crawford.
still disrespect Crawford till this day by not putting him as the pound-for-pound king. I mean, Usyk went live.
Now, notice what AKHi TV is stating. He's saying that they're disrespecting Terence Bud Crawford by not putting him as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. You know what that almost sounds like? It sounds like a lot of these feminist women that basically claim that you're disrespecting Serena Williams by not putting her as the greatest tennis player of all time. Not just the greatest female tennis player of all time, but the greatest tennis player of all time. AKHi TV represents that demographic. That's why I compare them to the super-duper liberals. Because the liberals are very, very entitled. They want something that they have not necessarily earned. Now, don't get it twisted. Terence Bud Crawford is a guy to where he has earned, in my view, for being the alleged #1 pound-for-pound fighter. But this narrative stating that is just not even close, especially when you have Usyk out there right now. I mean, you know, you can't claim something like that. You know, but we're gonna get into Usyk's argument a little bit later on when he mentions him. But you know what's so very interesting is that Dante's Box Nation and AKHi TV, these guys were talking so much shit about how Fulton was going to embarrass Inoue, and that once he beats Inoue, that since you guys place Inoue top 5 pound per pound, you all should be placing, you know, Stephon Fulton in the top 5 pound per pound. Because we all know that AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation were about to place Stephon Fulton in the top 5 or top 6 pound per pound if he was going to defeat Inoue. But you know what's so very interesting? Is that Inoue defeated Stephon Fulton, made him look like shit, won at his 4th weight class, by the way. But you never hear these guys, you know, state that Inoue's won at his 4th weight class. No, instead, he has to prove himself, you know, overall even more, you know, to put himself at the top rank. Right, but Crawford don't, you know, over a guy in Islam Madrimov that has 12 total fights, never fought anybody before. Like, get the hell out of here. You know, and don't get it twisted. Madrimov, in my view, is an A- level fighter. He's a good little fighter, you know, but give Inoue his credit as well. But isn't that so interesting how all of a sudden, Inoue, since he beat Stephon Fulton, they almost forgot Stephon Fulton. They don't even mention his ass anymore.
And death with Hunter.
But according to them, Stephon Fulton was top 10, top 5 pound per pound. So how come Inoue isn't debatably #1 pound per pound in AKHi TV? Because Inoue, according to you guys, beat a top 5 pound per pound fighter.
He barely beat Tyson Fury. And he also struggled with Anthony Joshua.
And of course, now he's talking about Alexander Usyk. So let's rewind this a little bit.
By not putting him as the pound-for-pound king. I mean, Usyk went life and death with Hunter. He barely beat Tyson Fury.
Now he's saying that Usyk went life and death with Michael Hunter. You're talking about a fight that ended up happening within like his first 10 fights, first 10 or like 11 fights of his career. And keep in mind that that is the only official loss in Michael Hunter's career. Keep that in mind. This saying, you know, this is the same guy that wanted to claim that Martin Bakole was getting avoided by Usyk and some of these other guys. Martin Bakole is a guy that got knocked out by Michael Hunter. Keep that in mind. Now, partially was due to an injury, I believe, that happened later on, but partial also was that Martin Bakole, he just was not ready. And it's also very obvious that Bukoli has a fucking problem with his conditioning. I mean, he should be embarrassed the way that he came into that last fight against Joseph Parker. I mean, they should have never let him in there anyway. But come on, dude. You're a top season level boxer that apparently is looking for a belt opportunity, and you come in at like 300 and something pounds? Like, come on. You should be ashamed of yourself. But anyways, it's just interesting I mentioned that, overall. But, let's continue.
And he also struggled with Anthony Joshua.
Right, but dude, he clearly beat Anthony Joshua in both of those fights about 8 rounds to 4. Let's get that first. Let's get that straight first off. But secondly, Anthony Joshua is a guy. Let me ask you something. Who's more of a threat, overall to their particular opponent, or who is looked at in greater esteem? Anthony Joshua for the heavyweight division at the time that Usyk defeated him, or Sean Porter at the time that Terence Crawford ended up defeating him? Now, certain people would say Errol Spence Jr., why are you not comparing that? Because no one's comparing Errol Spence and Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua, of course, was not looked at as a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. On some lists, not even a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter. If you were to compare top 5 pound-for-pound fighters, we're talking about Spence and Fury, if we're comparing those guys. But when you talk about AJ Anthony Joshua, he is a guy that would have been looked at in a decent amount of higher esteem than a Madrimov or a Sean Porter. It's not even close. And Anthony Joshua had so many big wins on his record. He had Kubrat Pulev, he had, I believe, Dillian White on there, Joseph Parker, Vladimir Klitschko, so many big A-grade level wins. Usyk went in there 20 pounds lighter, 3 inches shorter, having a reach disadvantage, and was never supposed to win that fight, really. And he beat and embarrassed Anthony Joshua on 2 separate occasions. And now all of a sudden that Usyk and Fury, all of a sudden now, that they're the kings of the heavyweight division. All of a sudden the quote-unquote heavyweight division is dead. That's what they're trying to tell you. But when Deontay Wilder was knocking all these bums out, he brought the vigor back to the heavyweight division. Deontay's going to be a top 10 heavyweight of all time if he defeats Tyson Fury. So once again, remember, AKHi TV and Dante at one point in time had Deontay Wilder top 5 pound-for-pound. Remember that, for beating bums.
Meanwhile, Crawford is smoking his competition. Fighters that are better than Usyk competition. Fighters that
are better than Usyk's competition. Once again, the last 3 opponents that Terence Crawford has fought comparative to that of Usyk's last 3 opponents. When you talk about Danny Dubois, he has recently become a champion in the heavyweight division. Who is really held in higher esteem, Madrimov or Danny Dubois? Right now, it would probably have to be Danny Dubois because he's actually come off of 3 great victories. It just is what it is. Now, certain people, of course, will pull the narrative of, if they were in the same weight class, overall, who would win? Well, that's, once again, I also don't like that because the heavyweight fighters, they end up fighting in a completely different way. They're slower and they're more powerful. So if we take a look at a fighter, for example, like a George Foreman, if we were to compare them size to size, if he was the same size as, say, Mayweather and the same size as, say, Vasily Lomachenko and the same size as some of those other guys, yeah, he probably wouldn't win those fights because his skill set wouldn't really be anywhere near comparable. But he's a heavyweight fighter, so he's going to look and fight completely differently than some of the fighters at the lighter weight class. So it's like, why would you even compare that in the first place? But that's pretty much one of the only arguments that they really have. But Danny Dubois right now is looked at in higher esteem than what Madrimov ever was because, no offense, but Madrimov has never beat anybody. Just is what it is. Sean Porter at that time, he had already lost 3 or 4 times, was not even a champion anymore. AJ was, even at both of their peak, AJ Anthony Joshua was looked at as in higher esteem. It's not even close. And then you talk about Fury and Errol Spence Jr. They're about on the same level in terms of pound-for-pound ranking, but I would have to put Fury above Errol Spence. And then on top of that, Fury was a dude that is decent amount. Remember when Deontay Wilder lost to Fury? And one of the things that they stated is that Fury had this size advantage. Where is that all of a sudden with Usyk? Because it's not to be mentioned at all with Usyk. And clearly Fury had a way bigger size advantage over Usyk than what he did over Wilder. Because at least Wilder can compete with height and reach, right? And power. Usyk is a guy that's 6'3" with a 78-inch arm reach. And a guy that's 220, 230 at maximum. All right, keep that in mind. But that's not supposed to count. We're just supposed to completely roll over the fact that Fury was way bigger than Usyk and that this was something that was never accomplished before. I got you.
are higher on the pound for pound.
So AKHi TV and these guys, they're legitimately pissed off that Usyk is ranked #1 pound for pound right now when he's been more active, had a better level of competition within his last few fights, at least when you talk about the average. And then on top of that, did something that was never supposed to happen by beating a way bigger fighter or a series of bigger fighters that were 20 plus pounds bigger than him and taller and lengthier than him and could be classified as all A-grade level wins. All right, so it is what it is. Right now, Usyk is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. If you have Crawford there, I understand. But right now, I think Usyk has to take that throne and take that mantle. And before I get some of the guys in here that say, oh, well, even Usyk stated that Crawford was the #1 pound-for-pound, right? And Crawford also stated that about Alexander Usyk. So does that mean that all of a sudden that, your argument is completely countered? Let's not use overall these arguments about, who said who was #1 pound-for-pound. Because, we can't rank things off of that.
Than Usyk competition. Likewise for Inoue, I don't even know who Inoue is fighting next. And no one knows who he fought before that. And no one knows who he fought before that.
Well, actually, I know a lot of the fighters that Inoue is fighting. Now the last fighter that he fought, that one South Korean guy, I believe, Kim, that of course was not supposed to be, that fight. It was supposed to be against an undefeated Australian fighter by the name of Sam Goodman. But of course, Sam Goodman, he ended up having multiple cuts. He was an undefeated Australian fighter, not someone that I would have considered an A-grade level fighter, but an interesting fight. Of course, in a way, of course, he had to fight that guy as a replacement. Of course, before then, he had to fight TJ Doheny, who was a former champion. Keep that in mind, by the way. Not someone that I would consider as A-grade, but he was a former champion. Keep that in mind, for these same Crawford fanboys like AKHi TV that love to state that Crawford defeated former champions. Keep in mind that TJ Doheny was a former champion. All right, two-weight division champion, I believe, actually. And then before then, of course, I believe that he defeated Louis Neri. So in a way, definitely deserves at least a certain amount of credit for beating guys like the Fultons and the Neris and certain guys like that.
Wow, he got real fighters that he can fight at 126 or even at 118 that can move up and fight him. At 122, at the very least, fight MJ and move on.
Right, but he claimed that he's going to fight MJ Akhmadaliev this year. Inoue has stated that multiple times. And isn't it so interesting that AKHi TV and Dante, that they keep trying to state all this shit or allege that Inoue is avoiding MJ Akhmadaliev? It's not like MJ Akhmadaliev is undefeated. For those of you that don't know, MJ Akhmadaliev ended up losing to Marlon Tapales because Inoue was completely planning to unify that weight class, which of course is exactly what he did. But in order to do that, you have to win the fight and win the belts. MJ lost to Marlon Tapales. He ended up losing. All right. And so, anyways, he fought Marlon Tapales, knocked him out in a relatively competitive fight, and then it pretty much ended right there. If this was overall, once again, a black fighter, if Inoue was a black fighter that they were trying to promote, they'd be saying, what the fuck does he need to fight you for? You lost. Move on. That's what they would be stating. But apparently Inoue is ducking this guy overall that has already lost to Marlon Tapales. So let me ask you something, AKHi TV. Are you going to give Inoue A-grade level credit if he ends up defeating, MJ? We all know that's not going to happen. Although I think that it would be a relatively good win, but is what it is.
But this man is too busy cherry picking while old media is keeping their mouths shut.
No, Inoue is not busy cherry picking. That's just a narrative that you pull out of your ass because you realize that a lot of people are going to ask you the question about, well, Inoue is very dominant, he's more active, and on top of that, he's fighting a lot of champions. So what AKHi TV and Dante, the narrative that they always pull out of their ass is that this guy is quote-unquote avoiding this guy, or he's ducking this guy, he's ducking that guy. Keep in mind that once again that they won't claim that Crawford is ducking Jaron Boots Ennis, even though he already completely unified that division. When it comes down to it, at least Crawford unified the 147-pound weight class, just like Inoue did at 122 pounds. And then keep in mind that, Crawford, he could face an elite level black fighter in Jaron Boots Ennis, right? Because they're always harping on about how, in order to prove yourself, you need to fight the black fighters, which to a degree is true, of course. But how come Crawford doesn't have to fight Jaron Boots Ennis? No, he can get away with fighting, the Caucasian, all of a sudden this Caucasian killer, in Israel Madrimov, this guy that's a monster, because it's the right Caucasian that's going to fight their fighter. But the guys that Inoue or Usyk are fighting, are bums. And listen, a lot of the guys that Inoue's fighting, they're not A-grade level fighters in my view. At least a lot of them. But the thing is that you should at least mention that MJ Akhmadaliev ended up losing to the guy that Inoue beat, and that MJ had the opportunity, but he lost.
Shut. While the race...
And also keep in mind that you should also mention the fact that Inoue has stated multiple times that a part of his 4th fight plan this year has been to fight MJ Akhmadaliev and also to fight Nick Ball. Because keep in mind, whenever Gervonta Tank Davis or one of these favorite black fighters of theirs love to run their mouth about it, how they're going to fight this guy and fight that guy, they all give them a round of applause, even if they're full of shit, and it never comes to fruition. But when it comes to Inoue stating he's going to fight those guys, he don't even mention it. Like, this dude is so full of shit.
Fans are acting as if this guy is fighting monsters when he's fighting cherries. That's why no one even talks about his fight. That's why when Inoue fights, literally the next hour, people already moved on. No one is talking about him no more.
That's pretty much like how it was with Terence Crawford for a very long time on AKHi TV. That's why Terence Crawford was not ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter for a very long time. Because no one gives a fuck when you're not defeating fighters that they believe actually have a chance.
Because he's the king of cherry picking.
No, he's not the king of cherry picking. It's just that Inoue is in a weight class to where there's just not a lot of people who can compete with him. But that's why he's eventually going to have to get in the ring with guys like Nick Ball, MJ Akhmadaliev, and on top of that, also guys like Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, and also guys like Junto Nakatani. And let me tell you this, if Inoue ends up defeating both Nick Ball or all Nick Ball, Junto Nakatani, and also that of Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, if he does all that, he's going to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. And AKHi TV can like that, he can not like that, And and if we're going to be real, if he does that, he's already going to have a better resume than Terence Crawford, probably by a decent amount, because, he would then have wins over like 3 pound-for-pound fighters, or at least top 20 pound-for-pound fighters, some top 10.
However, some way, somehow, these are the fighters that old media are placing over Crawford on the pound-for-pound list. Crawford is knocking out his rivals, while Usyk is struggling with them. Inoue struggled with a 39-year-old Donaire.
Right, that fight was how long ago, Mr. AKHi TV? Like why? Whenever they talk about Crawford, they only want to talk about his recent most dominant performances. But then when it comes to a fighter with Inoue, like the one shaky performance that he had against Donaire, which was like, what, 5 years ago? When it comes down to like they just love to put that in there for ammunition. Like, dude, keep in mind that Terence Crawford about 5 years ago got knocked down against Aegis Kavalauskas, or at least should have, had a very shaky performance in his most recent fight against a fighter that only had 12 fights and had never fought anybody before. He just had a 7 rounds to 5 fight with that guy. Okay? So keep that in mind.
The only good
And this guy is actually mentioning oh, Usyk, well, he's struggling with his competition. He's supposed to, you idiot. Usyk is a guy that's way, way undersized for the heavyweight division. He's a cruiserweight. All right? Come on. What are you talking about? He ended up beating Tyson Fury, a guy that was pretty much regarded as the best and the most skilled heavyweight of his day, pretty much a super heavyweight. Usyk was the only one ever able to defeat Tyson Fury. And he also came back and beat a great version of Joshua. And then he beat Daniel Dubois, who recently has been on a tear, defeating guys like Filip Pergovic and, big baby Jarrell Miller, with the man titties, that dude who balloons up to 502 pounds, and then, of course, he was also able to beat AJ Anthony Joshua, a done version of AJ Anthony Joshua, in my view. But still, those are the fighters that he was able to beat. So please spare me this bullshit of, oh, well, Usyk struggled with his competition. He's supposed to. What's the main thing that these guys say when Terence Crawford is about to fight Canelo Alvarez? All they mention is the size. But Usyk is outsized by his opponents by 20 pounds. He's a legit cruiserweight fighting against some heavyweights, some super heavyweights in certain situations, and they just say, oh, well, he's struggling with his competition with no, context whatsoever. Come on.
On Inoue resume is Fulton. That's it. That's all. Meanwhile, Crawford knocked out Errol Spence, Sean Porter, Benavidez, Mean Machine, Jeff Horn, Amir Khan, Gamboa, beat Poe.
Listen to all the names that he's trying to include within the elite level names. All right, let's rewind this.
Meanwhile, Crawford knocked out Errol Spence, Sean Porter,
Great win. Great win.
Benavidez,
Bum.
Mean Machine,
Bum.
Jeff Horn,
Bum.
Amir Khan,
Completely washed by the time that Terence Bud Crawford had fought him.
Gamboa, beat Postal, knocked out Flex Diaz,
Bum.
and the list goes on and on and on.
Listen, when you talk about guys like Felix Diaz and Jose Benavidez and Aegis Kavalasquez, spare me the bullshit. Those guys were not champions. All right. So once again, AKHi TV and these guys, like, they'll legit tell you straight to your face that, well, he beat Felix Diaz and Aegis Kavalasquez and Jose Benavidez. Dude, those guys are B grade level fighters at most. They're not A grade level fighters, man. Like, the thing, what I'm going to tell you is this. If your fighter debatably cannot beat the best version of Adrian Broner, who's always been a B grade level fighter, he's not an A grade level fighter. He's not a big A grade level win, period.
So while Inoue is trying to find his next cherry-picking victim, fighting a nobody in Las Vegas, Crawford, on the other hand, is moving up pretty much 3 weight classes to fight Canelo Alvarez. You guys know what will be.
Now, what is AKHi TV really stating there? And certain people overall, they may state, well, he's comparing Inoue and Crawford side by side. Well, what he's also really stating is that if Crawford ends up losing to Canelo Alvarez, that he's not going to dethrone Terence Bud Crawford from his #1 pound-for-pound spot. That's what he's also really stating. Even though Terence Bud Crawford, apparently he's way more skilled than Canelo, and he would have the height and the reach advantage over Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo is apparently super one-dimensional. They talk all this shit, but they really reveal what they truly think about Canelo Alvarez through what they talk about. See, AKHi TV, once again, he's like one of these guys that loves to talk shit. Like, he's that guy overall that loves to talk shit about how he's going to beat your ass overall and all sort of stuff. But then as soon as, shit gets real, he's the first one to get quiet. Like, that's the type of person that AKHi TV is, at least when you talk about, overall this type of situation. These guys love to talk shit all the living long damn day about how Canelo Alvarez overall, how he's so one-dimensional, blah, 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 and how Jermell Charlo may have an easier time against him than Brian Gastano. But then as soon as the fight is about to happen, all of a sudden you realize their energy does a complete 180.
The equivalent of that is Inoue moving up to fight Gervonta at 135. Or Keisha.
Well, Inoue has already moved up 4 different weight classes. So that's the thing. Crawford, of course, is at his 4th weight class right now, and I understand Inoue, but actually, Inoue, I believe, he would have to move up a couple more weight classes even to fight Gervonta. Now, of course, that weight class would be around the same weight as, say, he would have to go up around the same poundage as, say, what a Crawford would. But, so basically, that's what AKHi TV, that's what they're going to do. If Crawford ends up getting the shit kicked out of him over Canelo Alvarez, all they're going to state is that, well, he was daring to be great. And if Inoue and these guys overall can't do it, then blah, blah, blah. Well, what I'm going to state is this. If Usyk can defeat Tyson Fury, then shouldn't Crawford be able to defeat Canelo Alvarez? Because Usyk ended up defeating a Tyson Fury, someone that was 6'9", weighing 280 pounds in one fight and 260 pounds in the other fight. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if he can beat someone like a Tyson Fury, someone that's a supremely skilled, super heavyweight fighter, if Usyk can do that, shouldn't Crawford be able to do that?
John.
If Sugar Ray Leonard can do it to Marvin Hagler, shouldn't Terence Crawford be able to do that to Canelo Alvarez? So, once again, no problem. But if you want to say this, then just no problem. But then stop putting, after this fight, if he gets the shit kicked out of him by Canelo Alvarez, stop putting Crawford's name in with Sugar Ray Leonard or guys like Floyd Mayweather or guys overall like that of an Alexander Usyk. No problem.
Or Shakur. Inoue said he will never do that because he's simply not as great as Crawford. He can't even...
You see that? What AKHi TV is going to try to do. See, what you can read these guys like a book overall if you know their true machinations. What he's going to be stating overall if Crawford ends up losing that fight, which he more than likely would, he's just going to state that, oh, well, Crawford was just daring to be great, and, it was just the size that gave Canelo Alvarez, this. So, once again, you can't take anything what these guys say seriously at all.
imagine doing what Crawford is actually doing. But they have Inoue and Usyk on the pound-for-pound list over Crawford. We all know why. New Hope Order.
Because Usyk right now is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. And resume-wise, I also would not put Inoue's resume above Crawford's. But the problem is that I really don't have a problem with Inoue being over Crawford anymore at this point, because it's like Crawford's not fucking doing anything. He's fighting one time a year. And the last time that he fought against Israel Madrimov, he had a 7 rounds to 5 fight with that guy. We don't really know how good he actually is. But obviously he's not the quote-unquote best champion or overall, this A+ level guy like they tried to claim that he was, because Virgil Ortiz just beat him, and probably in better fashion.
The crazy part about it all is all the fighters that old media have over Crawford on the pound-for-pound list, all of them said, and still say till this day, that Crawford is the pound-for-pound king. Inoue said, "I'm not the pound-for-pound king. Crawford is." Usyk said, "I'm not the pound-for-pound king. Crawford is."
Isn't it also once again very interesting how Usyk has been on public record now for months that after he defeated Fury, that Crawford said Usyk deserves the #1 pound-for-pound spot, or he's at least up there with me. That's what Crawford stated. Never once have I ever seen a video from AKHi TV stating that. Like, they've tried to completely brush that under the rug.
Bivol said, "The #1 pound-for-pound is Crawford." Better BF said the same thing. The #1 pound-for-pound is Crawford. Devin Haney said the same thing. Shakur. And all the fighters said.
Also keep in mind that Better Beef couldn't win up to fight Alexander Usyk, but he said that no, because Usyk would be too big and too great. So once again, this narrative that they're also trying to use to like propel up a Crawford or propel up a Gervonta Tank Davis, because Inoue will not go up to fight Davis, or Lomachenko will not go up to fight Crawford. Are they going to use that same standard for Usyk?
The pound-for-pound king is Crawford. However, old media, despite the past greats from Mike Tyson, Roy Jones to Floyd, to the new...
Mike Tyson is not an all-time great level fighter. I'm going to have to do a video very soon about this, but I'm going to come out with a list of my top 5 or top 10 most overrated boxers of all time or fighters of all time. Mike Tyson is, first, spoiler alert, he's going to be on that list. No offense against Mike Tyson. No offense, but when you talk about, like, you want to talk about a list that's about who's the most liked fighter, the most popular fighter, you're talking about Mike Tyson. Like, Mike Tyson is one of the most popular fighters ever, but in terms of actual results, he's one of the most overrated fighters ever. No discussion.
Greats, or potential greats, from Usyk to Inoue to Bivol to Better BF.
See how he claims that, how Terence Crawford is an all-time level great, but with Usyk or certain guys like that, they're potential all-time level greats. So once again, the double standards that AKHi TV always bitches and moans about that black fighters have to go through, which he's absolutely correct about, at least in certain circumstances, he puts those same double standards, actually, they're not even double standards, like, they're quadruple standards. He puts them through way worse overall than what even ESPN and Ring Magazine does with certain black fighters.
To Devin Haney, all stating that Crawford is pound-for-pound #1. Meanwhile, the people that don't know shit about boxing, word to Roger Mayweather, old media that is, due to being racially biased, they refuse to put a black fighter as the...
No, the only one that doesn't know shit about boxing and also is super racially biased is you. You fucking pea-brain idiot. Anyway.
Pound-for-pound #1 king. Simply because that doesn't fit the New Hope agenda.
Uber Eats is delivering more deals, so you can get more food to watch more basketball. Right now.
The New Hope agenda. Old media want to stop the cycle of the fighters on the coincidental list being the pound-for-pound kings, from the Jack Johnson days, to the Joe Louis days, to the Sugar Ray Robinson days, to the Muhammad Ali days, to the Sugar Ray Leonard days, to the Sweet Pea Whitaker days, to the Roy Jones days, to the Floyd, to the Andre Ward, to the Crawford days. Until this day, they want to break the cycle. But the bad news is, boxing breed greats. Only from the fighters on the coincidental list in the sport of boxing, hate it or love it. If you look
Well, right now, boxing greats are really everywhere. And listen, a certain amount of people overall have stated this, that boxing has become more global as a sport. And it's made, let's just be real, it's made a whole lot of the pro blackity black channels like AKHi TV or Dante's Boxing Nation very insecure. Now, does that mean overall that black American fighters, that they're just going to disappear and that their time is done and that they're going to be replaced by, complete Caucasians, all that stuff? No, of course not. But listen, at the end of the day, certain things change over time. And a sport can become potentially more global, or it can become, a little bit more changed depending on the talent pool, or the training type of styles, depending on where they're at. Like when you talk about 20, 30 years ago, like, yeah, there were certain great European fighters, but not to the same level of degree that we would have today, especially because of the Olympic pedigrees of certain Ukrainian fighters or Russian fighters or Kazakhstan fighters or Cuban fighters or other things like that. Recently Dominican fighters. Like if you were to talk about these guys saying that, overall a lot of, certain Latino fighters like Mexican fighters, they're getting replaced with a lot of these black Dominican fighters, AKHi TV and these guys wouldn't have a problem with it. They only have a problem with it when it's guys that are not black fighters. But the thing is that, sports today in general have become a little bit more globalized. You take a look at the NBA. Yes, there was always European players, but the European player has really taken over the league, at least at the current moment in time. You have guys like Nikola Jokic, you have guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, you have Luka Doncic. All those players right now would be within the top 5 NBA players, in the league right now. How many times can we really say within the NBA's history that 3 out of the 5 top 5 NBA players right now would be from Europe? You have one from Greece, you have one from Slovenia, and you have one from Serbia. Like, it's never happened before. And right now, even when you take a look at the NFL, the black quarterbacks such as Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, and other guys like that, Jaden Daniels, they have now, become a little bit more, mainstreamed, in the NFL. So it's not really something to get insecure about necessarily. It's just sometimes the talent pool, especially when there's more opportunities or especially when it's a little bit more popular in that area than what it used to be. Yes. At the end of the day, sometimes it can become a little bit more globalized. Boxing, of course, has always been a global sport. But I think what people really mean is that there's just, more talent in certain talent pools or certain areas of the world that there wasn't before. Like the Ukraine now has, especially because of Papa Lomachenko, has a great amateur pedigree and great amateur style. A lot of the Russians now, they're even more prominent than what they were before. The Kazakhstan fighters, we didn't hear about those guys 30 years ago. When you talk about, that of the Uzbekistani fighters, we didn't really hear about them until recent. The Dominican fighters, up until recent, So once again, they get all, up in arms about it. But it's not to get up in arms about it. It just means overall that there's more talent pools at other places across the world. It happens.
at 99% of all the fighters in boxing.
And even in tennis, for example, because I love tennis as a sport. Tennis used to be dominated a lot of the times by the Americans. It used to be dominated by guys like Pete Sampras, I believe, or Sampras, however you pronounce his name, and Andre Agassi, guys like John McEnroe, certain guys like that. Now, of course, you definitely had your Europeans or your Australians like, Rod Laver and, guys, of course, like Bjorn Borg, who I believe was Swedish or, maybe from somewhere else, I can't remember, and other guys like that, of course, Boris Becker and, I think a couple of Czech guys that I'm not remembering, Ivan Lendl, I believe. But of course, it took a completely new turn by the time that Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal arrived, and then of course Novak Djokovic. Then it got completely dominated by European guys, because there was not really an American champion in sight. They were all European. When you talk about that golden era of tennis, you're talking about Djokovic, you're talking about Federer, you're talking about Nadal, who are all European. You're talking about Stan Wawrinka, Andy Murray. Those are the main guys that you're talking about. So it's like, sometimes sports just change and there's nothing wrong with that.
They all lost to a fighter on the coincidental list, especially when they were undefeated for the most part. That's the whole absolute truth. And they pray.
Well, the whole absolute truth, really, AKHi TV, is that even though there's a little bit of truth to that, there's a little bit of truth in some of the things that AKHi TV is stating to a slight degree. But he's just taking it way, way, way too far. And it's no offense against AKHi TV, but he's full of shit. He's been full of shit pretty much the whole entire time. It is what it is. I've been saying this for years, but it's whatever.
On Crawford downfall. Because if he moves up to beat Canelo, he will actually destroy the New Hope order.
If Crawford were to beat Canelo Alvarez, he would be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, and that's when you could state that there wouldn't really be a debate. But the thing is that are you gonna, put Crawford into the same standards? Because Usyk was just able to beat Fury, which one could debate is similar to a Canelo Alvarez overall losing to that of a Crawford. So I mean, are you gonna put the same standards? Because Canelo was apparently so one-dimensional. And Crawford has the reach and the height advantage over him. So shouldn't Crawford be the favorite heading into that fight?
Because all that work that they did to bury his accomplishments will be brought to light. I mean, look at the new school fighters. From which race would you say the next pound-for-pound king will come?
Now, notice what AKHi TV just said there. He said, which race do you think? He didn't say which country. He said, which race? So that tells you overall, once again, what AKHi TV, what his whole motivation has been this whole entire time. All right, it is what it is. And listen, Black American fighters, they usually have been the most dominant within that of boxing history. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, just because there's a guy like a Usyk every once in a while, or a guy like, maybe a Canelo Alvarez that could be looked at as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, it doesn't necessarily mean overall that there's anything wrong with that, but you have to have a legitimate debate about it. The problem that I have with someone like an AKHi TV is that he always tries to debate this shit that is not even close. Like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, it's people like Usyk and Canelo Alvarez, no offense, but they have better resumes than Crawford. Just is what it is.
It don't take a genius to figure that out. I mean, which race has the best champions on the come up or the best prospects? Well, I'm a start.
And isn't that very particularly interesting how these guys will claim that in one sentence that, who has the best prospects coming up, but then when they want to tear down a guy, like Usyk, they'll state that, well, more black people, today are really playing more football and basketball, so we don't really know how great they are, right? But then they don't mention that with Andre S.G. Ward, because where were the James Tonys? Where were the Bernard Hopkins? Where were the Roy Jones Jr.'s in those weight classes when Andre Ward was around? He never fought any of those guys. So, I mean, it's like, come on.
Mason, Kermel Moulton, Keyshawn.
And I get it. When you talk about Usyk's divisions, there's been a little bit more of a lack of the Black American fighters in those weight classes who have usually been the harder, fighters to defeat, in those weight classes and what there are lower weight classes. I get it. But it's just interesting how with Andre Ward, he's one of the greatest fighters of all time, and he defeated really nothing but European Caucasians. But, with Usyk, he's a potential all-time great, even though he defeated guys that he never was supposed to be in the first place. It's just interesting.
Davis, now your turn. Name me fighters from another race.
And keep in mind that, America actually, at least within the past several years, they've actually come out with some very decent contenders from America. It's just that they couldn't ever add up to some of the other fighters, like Jarrell Big Baby Miller, who recently had a draw against Andrew Ruiz, or Deontay Wilder, who, of course, ended up getting defeated by Tyson Fury, or, of course, Jared Big Baby Anderson. I believe, of course, he ended up recently losing to Martin Bakole, so I mean, thing is that they want to discredit Usyk, but at the end of the day, the Black American heavyweight fighters, they've had some great talents. They've had their chance. They just couldn't add up, is what it is.
That can compete with that. With the opinions out of the door and the facts laid out on the table, go ahead and drop your thoughts.
Facts. I think you mean utter bullshit. This is what you mean. But anyways, I know that this is a long video, but I wanted to get all this shit out of the way. This is probably the last time that I'm going to be talking about this. But anyways, that pretty much is about it. I just wanted to talk about the complete history of this because this has been going on for a very long time. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later, and we'll see what happens next with this.